Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I thank all of you on the panel for being here today. Governor Sununu, thank you for coming to testify today, and I want to take just a moment to talk about the past interactions Congress has had with the airline industry, and we've already touched on it this morning that Congress passed the Deregulation Act in 1978, and the goal was free up the airline industry from the burdensome, inefficient government boards that dictated the fares, routes, and new entry to the market. I'd really like to know from your experience, how did the Airline Deregulation Act change the way, in your mind, that the airline industry is regulated, and how did that deregulation really benefit customers?
Well, again, it opens up a true free market as opposed to having the government decide what the fares are going to be and who can have what routes. And free market competition works without a doubt. And the proof in that is just, let's go to pricing. I'm a big believer that nothing shows competition more than the price. So in the late 70s, let's call it what it was. Basically, rich white people could fly in a plane, right? Today, almost any American, through a variety of different ways, can afford to fly from point A to point B. We have ultra low-cost carriers, we have multiple routes, we have more competition if you want to go to, and that's the other definition of competition that's very important here. It's not just the overall number of carriers. It's when I go to buy a ticket, oh, I have 4 or 5 or 6 carriers going from Wichita to Dallas. So now they're all competing on that exact same route. And we have more competition per route than ever before. And that is allowed now, right? Because they can compete freely and it's not the government saying, well, you're gonna go here and you're gonna go there. So on pricing alone, it has been a game changer. On low income and everyday Americans, it's been an absolute game changer. On the ability for the airlines themselves to create their own models. One of the challenges I would say that Spirit has, they had a lot of challenges, and there's a lot of reasons Spirit went bankrupt. But one of the challenges was, some of the bigger carriers said, we're going to compete. We're going to provide a basic economy ticket that we didn't provide before at a very low cost level. And the government doesn't get involved in the economics of that to provide more options. So it isn't just one carrier for low income families or folks that don't have none of the money to spend for the extra frills. So more carriers were competing at a lower cost level. That's all because of the deregulation opportunities that came from the late 70s.
So in that same vein, in what ways would you say, I know part of this hearing is looking at when to regulate and when not to regulate or deregulate. In what ways do you think Congress, maybe specifically, could further deregulate the airline industry in order to benefit the consumers?
I think one area where the airlines have taken a clear position, first, the airlines do a lot for their customers, right? They put over $1 billion of their own money in compensation. They already have massive refund policies. And please understand, there's a big difference between a refund, your flight didn't take off, you get your money back, and compensation, which is like the punitive penalty. The airlines and some of the regulatory proposals that we've seen in the past basically said, we're gonna penalize you for acts of God. There's a huge weather storm, the plane didn't take off, you now have to provide not just a refund, but compensation on top of that, right? An airline wanted to change their tail number for a certain reason. Oh, that's a canceled flight. No, the flight isn't canceled, we're just changing tail number. Nope, the previous administration said, no, that's gonna be a count against you. So it's things that are out of our control, which then burden us, which ultimately, those costs probably get passed down to the consumer. That's been the hardest part. We're an industry that has an average profit margin of 4.5%. Virtually every dollar the airlines make go back into airports and better products and all that sort of thing. So additional regulation, right? Some regulations have value, all regulations have cost, right? And so you have to understand that the pros and the cons there, and those costs ultimately, unfortunately, would probably have to go down to a lot to the customer. So more regulation can be very burdensome for the customer in terms of cost.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Ravitch, in my final minute here, I want to touch base with you on this topic of cabotage, if I may, and referring to the practice of a foreign air carrier operating between 2 U.S. airports. Under current law, I'm told the United States only allows for cabotage when authorized by the Secretary of Transportation. How might cabotage increase competition and benefit consumers? Mr. Ravitch.
Congressman, thank you for the question. So cabotage is a maritime term, the concept being that a foreign carrier can operate domestically. So British Airways could fly from Tampa to Toledo or something. So you would have competition, you'd have more firms in the marketplace potentially, perhaps an infusion of capital, and all of the competition that flows therefrom. The issue, of course, is what's already been referred to, which is how those carriers are subsidized or sponsored. There's some national security concerns, but it is something worthwhile, I think, to at least explore and understand how you might get more firms into the marketplace.
Very good. Thank you for that, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.